are our rights right now?
They're wherever you're willing to draw a line and say, you cannot come across this line or I'll kill you. That's where your rights are. And if you don't understand that, folks, then it's beyond my capability to explain it to you. They will get away with whatever you let them get away with. And until you draw the line and you're willing to die for what you believe in, they will keep taking and taking and taking and taking until there is no more to take. It's all gone, and you're a slave.
Heck, you've heard me on various shows, even the one recently where I say,
That's right.
How do you know that?
That's exactly right. So if you hear, and I'm just going to finalize this note, if you ever hear that Dr. Judy Wood is controlling anything other than the evidence, how it's presented, the truth about how the psyoping has been occurring, and also she's educated me most recently on sidejacking of the free energy technology message. Now, I want to go back here, if you don't mind, Dr. Judy. And we're, like I said,
can I tell a little childhood story here?
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is what this segment's
about. Charlie
about.
the crow. We had a pet crow growing up, and he, flew around outside. And you call him, he'd come down out of the tree. If you knew his name, he knew you were all right. And Charlie the crow. Well, he was always mischievous. And my sister left her keys in her car, left the car running. Charlie pulled the keys out of the ignition and flew over the pond right by our house, flew over the pond with him.
Are you serious?
That's scary. Like, she's got this whole glob of keys to, they're going to get lost. And so my brother, she's in a panic. My brother was eating a sandwich. And so he sits down calmly on the hood of the car, sets his sandwich down. Charlie needs to steal that sandwich. He sets the keys down to steal the sandwich, and my brother quickly grabs the keys.
Oh, you got to be kidding me. That's funny.
That's the same kind of thing that goes on. You're interested in free energy technology, but you get diverted to something else so they can destroy the right track you were on.
That's right. That's right. And it's not just a matter of uncovering. In the beginning, I thought that I was very excited to display this evidence, talk about the science. And people actually, they already know that everyone is almost fatigued by going after Al-Qaeda. Almost fatigued to the point to where 9/11 evidence, we've already resolved all that stuff. Me bringing 9/11 evidence forward, they were pretty confident that everyone was fatigued. And they must make sure that I don't reveal too much information. But when I started touching on the free energy technology thing, notice how the psyopers and psyjackers became activated and came on very, very strong. Did they not, Dr. Judy? You've watched me go through this.
Oh, yeah. And as I think Andrew Johnson maybe said, that when we made the connection with the Hutchison effect, it was just a dead giveaway. We were right over the target because of all the storm of garbage that came spitting up.
Right. And these methods that are employed are basically, just like I was describing earlier. I don't know if you heard me describe this as I've analyzed this thing. They know how to write the script real time based on how we're responding to the awakening, how we're responding to the information we're receiving in our brains. Do they not?
Oh, yeah. Just like, how lawyers work in a courtroom. And this is something my lawyer taught me. He said, if the law is on your side, you talk about the law. If the evidence is on your side, you talk about the evidence. If neither one of those things are on your side, you talk about just something else, anything else. Right. And you see that practice over and over again. It's all sorts of distractions away from the evidence and what is known. And it's replaced with words like, or phrases like, oh, guess we'll never know what really happened, or nobody knows what happened. And if people start repeating that, they start believing it.
Right.
But wait a minute. We know what we know that we know. Why should we forget that? And that's what happens.
That's right. Now, I want to talk about the evidence. The evidence is very, very, very important. And for the listeners, okay, and for the purposes of documenting this process by which I have gone through, okay, I'm going to convey this to you. The evidence is so important. The presentations that Dr. Judy Wood has been doing for years, okay, even through her 500-plus page textbook, presenting the evidence, how to look at the evidence, and how to not be distracted by it. And Dr. Judy has also learned that the people that have been trying to suppress this evidence have been claiming to be scholars, have been claiming to be experts. That's also a diversionary tactic, and that is to credentialize themselves, make them seem like experts so that you'll look away. But let me read something to you here, okay? This is as a result of the work that she's doing right now. Dr. Judy was on the Hagman and Hagman program, and I'm going to read something to you here. on Homeland Security U.S. All right, and this was published 26th of February. Investigators understand the value of evidence that exists at any crime scene. It has been written that if you listen to the evidence carefully enough, it will speak to you and tell you exactly what happened. If you don't know what happened, keep listening to the evidence until you do. The evidence always tells the truth. The key is not to allow yourself to be distracted away from seeing what the evidence is telling you. And Dr. Judy, please allow me to just continue reading here, because this is Doug Hagman. He's a 40-plus year investigator, and he was floored by recent discoveries in your textbook. Those instructions were constantly drilled into me during my 30 years as a career investigator, and Joe, my son and co-host, for nearly 10 years. Forget conspiracy theories, wild speculation, and even your own biases, and look at the evidence, for the evidence always tells the truth. The key is not to allow yourself to be distracted away from seeing what the evidence is telling you. Now, we have, I believe, very convincingly demonstrated, without trying to manipulate the minds of Joe and Doug Hagman, we've clearly shown them as investigators to take a look at that evidence and to not listen to anything that they had learned since that fateful day on 9/11. And they have just recently been exposed to the evidence that's contained in your book. Here's my message, and you can comment on this, Dr. Judy.
Do you remember what he said at the beginning? He said it's not just a preponderance of the evidence. This is beyond all reasonable doubt.
I was just going to say this. That there is no question. This is indisputable evidence, ladies and gentlemen. And this is a big part of what I'm going to convey here in this segment here. Dr. Judy Wood saw the evidence right from day one, and I'm going to have her describe what she saw right from day one. She's put it together, and she's tried to tell everyone to look at the evidence, look at it, and don't be distracted by all the psyopers. But ladies and gentlemen, that's the first step in your process, is to understand that you're going to be diverted away from the information contained in the textbook. First, you need to know what the evidence is. We talk about psyoping because you need to know how you're going to be diverted away from it, okay? But you need to know this, most importantly, is that this evidence that's in this book is indisputable. It has never been disputed. So you have to look at it and make sure that as you make up your own mind, when you see it for yourself, the evidence will tell you what the true story is. You need to know what your environment is, the psyopers and the psyjackers, and we'll get more into that. But Dr. Judy, when did you discover something was wrong?
As I was watching the TV set in the faculty conference room. To me, that looked like actually, I learned earlier on. Like
on 9/11, when you saw the towers crashing, right?
Would you like me to start with the radio program or the...
Please, right from the very first moment that you discovered something was wrong.
Well, I taught a 3-hour graduate class on Tuesday evening, so I got up a little bit late. And just to make sure I'm up by a certain time, I have a clock radio that would kick on with a really obnoxious talk radio station. It would be so obnoxious it would get me up. And I was up before that, and I was in another room entering grades from a test and a spreadsheet. And the radio kicked on. I didn't feel like going in there to shut it off. And then these guys were talking about, well, the guy at the party last night made a wrong turn with his airplane and ran into the building. And then a little bit later, I'm kind of half tuning it out like they're telling a joke. A little later, they say, oh, there's another one from that party who made a wrong turn with the airplane and ran into the building. And this is getting too weird. They're not to the punchline yet. So I went and turned the TV on, and then I'm seeing something else. And I have rabbit ears, so back then, and I would switch around all the different channels, and they're all playing the same tune, the same image from the same angle. And that was just weird to me, because usually you have, up close and personal, a reporter with a camera in somebody's face. What did you see? What did you think? But it was all the same thing. And that bothered me. And then there's the incident at the Pentagon. Mm-hmm. And my parents live near the Pentagon, so, I need more data. This looked like somebody was playing a psyops on the public, kind of like War of the Worlds. Mm-hmm. And so I called my mom to ask her what she saw, because, if we were being attacked, she would obviously see fighter jets overhead, right? Mm-hmm. Called her up. She didn't know anything was going on. Looked out, no fighter jets. So got her skeptical. And it really made a difference how you entered this, whether you're skeptical or not. And that stayed with her. I then went into campus, and the first two faculty I ran into said, we got to go take them out. We got to take them all out. as though they had, their pitchfork in hand, ready for a lynching.
Oh, yeah,
They're
all of us.
already geared up for that.
Including me. I mean, I have to admit, I was one of those that actually submitted an application to become an air marshal right away.
And then I went into the faculty conference room, and where they're playing the TV set in this big screen television, and I'm looking, snickering, almost snickering, pointing at the TV set. I didn't say anything, but it was as though I said, "Come on, you guys aren't buying this, are you?" It looked kind of silly. I mean, it looked like what happens when you pull a piece of yarn from your sweater and it all comes undone.
Yeah.
Back in the, when we were learning how to knit, they
That's
didn't
right.
have the interlocking. And the other faculty looked at me, and these are full professors in the Department of Mechanical Engineering. They looked at me like I was nuts. And am I on a foreign planet? Am I insane, or is the rest of the world insane? And that's a very uncomfortable feeling. And most people tend to fall in with the majority with that discomfort. It's known as peer pressure.
Right.
But I still needed to logically reason it out. Like, what is the difference between what they're seeing and what I'm seeing?
Mm-hmm.
So I went up to my office and did some calculations, with the demise time. I thought it was a collapse at the time, or was pretending it was a collapse, just to see if I could test that. And that's where I first imagined the billiard ball example, because it's just taking it and simplifying it.
Mm-hmm.
And it really helps you understand things. And I thought, well, I must have memorized the coefficient of gravity wrong. I'm still being, open-minded.
How soon after 9/11? I'm sorry to interrupt you. How soon after 9/11? How soon after the demise of the towers were you doing that?
Oh, it was while they were still playing it over and over again on the TV set. I felt so weird in the conference room. I went up to my office.
Wow.
And this was actually before we got news of the Flight 93 thing. But right, it was about that time. But anyway, I was going through this calculation. I thought, okay, I've memorized the coefficient of gravity wrong. And then I look up my physics book off the shelf. Well, that's the same number. Well, maybe that was a typo, and I memorized that. That's why I have it memorized wrong. So I actually went through 4 physics books to find that coefficient of gravity. It's like I was just desperate to find an explanation for why I saw something that nobody else saw. I didn't give in and just decide I saw what I was told to see. That's the weird part about me. I needed to understand what was the discrepancy. And actually, I wrote down very simple equation of motion and took it to another faculty member 2 doors down. I didn't tell him what it was for. I showed it to him. He acted like I was having a senior moment because it was so simple. Like, of course, that's correct. And I still was like, what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
And I went to class. It was smart. They allowed classes to continue because they figured people have to talk about it anyway, so they may as well, go to class and talk about it. And I was telling my students, isn't it amazing how they built this building to just go away, just go straight down, or just go away? Isn't that amazing? And they were all into terrorists and Bin Laden and Al Qaeda, and I couldn't get them interested in the structure that was just bizarre behavior. And after a few days, you learn not to talk about it because if you're not on board with, grabbing your pitchfork and going after the witch, witch hunts, then if people would just have this tunnel vision.
I've heard you tell this story. I've heard you tell this story many times, but I didn't realize it was that soon after, while it was going on in the break room. I thought it was later on in the day that you were sitting down doing your calculations. Remarkable. Yeah. Can I share something with you here? I want to play this again. I know you've heard it earlier on in the week, okay, because this is important to display this, especially to our new listeners. The media, ladies and gentlemen, is so scripted. I'm going to prove it to you right here. There is you listen to this and you tell me whether or not somebody is typing information to create a perception in your mind. Now, what the message is and what they're trying to create, you don't even know that. They just want to influence your brain in the following manner. Listen to this. Hold on a second.
We've made a little bit of news this week. I don't know if you've heard about this, but I'll tell you why. It's because on our last New York show, which is tomorrow night, we're going to perform a wedding right here on this stage.
I'm sorry about that. Guess what I did? I messed up. Here it is. It actually queued up the wrong one here.
Because I don't value that particular clip all that much because, we don't know why the guy was saying it. Maybe he's just has a big ego, likes to pretend he's in control of everything, and spouts out whatever rationalization with confidence at spur of the moment.
Yeah, I'm
rather
sorry.
than a script.
That one unfortunately wasn't ready to be queued up. But here's my point: is that they showed over and over and over again that the media is reading from their teleprompters. Who's writing on those teleprompters is most important because it's actually happening across the country. Across the
right, they're all drinking out of the same watering hole.
They're all drinking out of the same exact watering hole. That's right. And it was very, very frightening. If I can find it before the end of the segment.
Right. That is what I noticed right off. First thing, when I turned on my TV and I started switching the different channels, they're all playing the same thing. Not, talking to some family member who just dropped their loved one off at an airport, or, a structural engineer someplace, or a building inspector someplace else, or a steel worker. It was all the same view and the same script.
Same exact thing. That's exactly right. Now, that was on 9/11. Immediately They came out. Okay. Now we also know, looking back at it, you didn't realize. I don't think you realized that it was this organized and this coordinated. But you said something is very, very wrong here. They're telling people one thing.
But also, there's a photo of like 5 minutes before 9 a.m., which was before the South Tower got its hole. Mm-hmm. Whereas the ticker across the bottom of the screen, showing the North Tower fuming away, the ticker says something about Bin Laden and Al Qaeda.
Right away.
Right before the second tower got its hole.
Wow. And I'm sure somebody found passports out on the curb within minutes after that ticker.
As I like to joke and say, well, did the driver of the airplane spool the window down and check that out before he hit the building? Because if it destroys the plane, certainly it destroys the passport.
And how we lay this out here, I'm just going to touch on the planes issue. Those towers, how they turn those buildings into dust, however they did that. Okay, we can discuss that. But those towers turned to dust in midair. They actually scripted the story by taking planes, whether they be droned, whether they be driven by Al Qaeda, whether they be trained by so and so. However, whether it be a projection, the planes had to hit the building and blow up in order to give the human mind the perception that that's what's going to cause these towers to turn to dust in midair.
Right.
To make that connection.
You give people an answer to their question, they stop asking questions. Remember the clip of Peter Jennings and George Stephanopoulos?
That's right.
George heard the buildings fell down on the ground, were pulverized and evaporated, so he repeated it. Or the steel-toed boots were melting, without realizing that people's feet inside the boots weren't melting.
That's right.
But people, in an emerged situation, it's just human nature. You run with the best story you have. It's like a field full of deer. If one of them spooked and is running, you're not going to stop and ask questions. You're going to run too. And so people tend to jump, like, the police yell, "Get down on the ground." You get down on the ground. You don't say, "Excuse me, why, sir? Please explain."
Now, also part of the PSYOP, as I understand it, and this is actually in the manuals that I've looked at, the Army manuals, and that is to create argument. That one of the best ways to find out what people are knowing is to find out what they're going to argue about and present and debate, right? So the Army has actually came up with a method, and they instruct their people, even in foreign lands in war, but now they're employing these techniques here in the United States, and that is to create argument, to actually prompt these guinea pigs called human beings to start yelling and screaming at each other, displaying what they know to be true and arguing between each other.
And then if you play your best cards in that situation, then they take those cards and they debunk them or appear to debunk them before you can ever use them elsewhere.
That's right. But isn't it it's a correct assumption that the argument portion of it is a very big part of the game, correct?
Oh yeah, because remember about Charlie the Crow?
Yeah, that's right.
If you distract him off into the sandwich or arguing about the sandwich, he's going to let go of the keys.
That's right. That's right. So we've studied this. We've known that we've been under a PSYOP. We know that indisputably, without a doubt, that free energy technology exists, and it was used on 9/11, and that cannot be disputed at this point. Can you say that unequivocally?
Correct. What I like to point out to people when they say, well, we need to see the serial number before we know that such technology exists. No, all we need to do is see the evidence that was created by whatever it was that created it. And then we know that something that can do that exists. For example, most of the buildings were turned to dust in midair. Nothing that we know of to this day in the public domain can do that, but we know that that technology exists because it happened. The towers aren't still there. The towers, the majority of them were turned to dust in midair. So therefore, a technology that can turn the majority of buildings to dust in midair does exist. That was evil use of that technology. But think of what else we can do with that technology. We can use it for good things.
That's right. Let me display this, especially to our new listeners here. We have a lot of them every single day. Here it is. Here's the example that I was trying to display to you before. It's a 1-minute clip. Here it is. Here's the scripting.
A lot of people think the big news stories today are the snowstorm that's hitting the Midwest or the looming federal budget cuts. But judging by local news, there's apparently an even bigger story that's sweeping the nation right now. Check it out.
Well, if you filled up your gas tank lately, then you don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you gas prices are on the rise. I know.
Now I'm gonna mention that how important it is to understand what's being done to us. Dr. Judy, I'm going to ask you a couple quick questions. Okay, this one is a yes or no. Do you think that any of those journalists are intentionally propagating the wrong information? Do you think they're just knowingly saying, let me just go ahead and play along with this PSYOP game and convey this information? Do you think they know that they're doing this?
Oh, no. If they have a mind of their own, the network doesn't like them. And, they get canned. They like people who say, this is what you're supposed to say. And you should be the pretty face or the cute face or whatnot, right, and make this statement. And just here's the news.
And they may not be knowing participants, right?
Right. But that's how they've grown up and been conditioned that this is the news. And this is, you're there to tell people the news. And here's the news for the day.
Right. There are people, controllers behind the curtains that know, and there's a select few of them that are essentially at the top of the food chain, know exactly what they need to propagate. Whether it be, let's say, a CIA guy that's typing those messages to get out to all of the news agencies, whatever message they're trying to convey. But they're using these people as unknowing participants. Even if you were to point at somebody, I used Alex Jones all the time. It might be a possibility that Alex Jones has no idea what they're having him do. He's just an unknowing participant.
Right, and cases, all of us are, to some extent, get conditioned because it's to get you to assume something without questioning it and then repeating it.
That's right. Now I'm going to ask you an important question because you've observed this take place, and we're not going to go too far into this, but something has recently taken place with my interchanges with those top-level PSYOPers, including James Fetzer, who I described, Gordon Duff. These guys are some of the greatest PSYOPs on the planet Earth. Okay, do you think that there's a possibility, because of the sensitive topics that we're bringing up here on the Pete Santilli Show, and that we are quote unquote over the target, and they sense that we are on to this free energy technology thing, that they will employ every single tactic, including using people like Danny Romero, to pick up the phone after they've exterminated Pete Santilli and get in Suzanne Posel's head and make her think like she's going to become a self-important person, and it's okay for her to throw Susanna Cole under the bus at all costs and use Suzanne Posel as a pawn in the scheme to manipulate the minds of our listenership? Do you think that's a possibility?
Oh, very, very, very true. And it's also to put a lot of gobbledygook around people and to smear it. As much as they can smear people's reputations, because then it would look like, oh, it's all about infighting. Well, infighting requires folks to be on the same team with the same objective. And if somebody's talking about something other than the evidence, they're not on the same team.
You think there's a possibility that that somebody like Suzanne Posel from Occupy Corporatism may be just an unknowing pawn in the scheme for them to accomplish their goal to quash this information?
It's more likely than not, because if you get too many people in the know, somebody's going to talk.
Yep.
So it's this careful way of orchestrating things. And I started noticing this early on, how ideas get planted. What they do is test to see what's going to take hold. Like, for example, right after I came out with all this, started pushing this evidence forward, Morgan Reynolds and I resigned from Jim Fetzer's group in mid-August 2006, August 17th to be exact. And then we started doing some real damage, putting out this evidence. And Morgan got me invited to the National Press Club, and also got me invited to, from there I went on to Ambrose Lane's show, and he was really getting me out there and this information. And then also we went to Seattle. And at that point, they needed to get this back under control, get the horse back in the barn. And Stephen Jones then gave a presentation in the beginning of November. And this was the first time that term space beams was used. But in that, you could see he was trying out what worked with the audience. He would hold his hand up and suggest something came from above and say it was lasers, masers, or something like that, to get a feel from the audience, the live audience, to see what would take hold. And with that suggestion, then people from the audience started repeating things.
Right.
And then it would be encouraged. So these people then came to believe that that's what Judy Woods was talking about. And I noticed the misspelled name.
Right. That's exactly right. Now, I do need to just touch on this and then move on. We're going to move on. And you're not, I mean, anybody can address a question to me. I will answer it.
Right.
In most cases.
But none of those people in the audience realized that they were being psyoped.
They don't. And that's why I'm bringing this up. The only reason why I'm bringing this up, ladies and gentlemen, is because I'm not impacted any way, shape, or I mean, I am impacted. It's just very, very sad to see that they will use every tactic, including what this person did was to try to destroy everyone around me. You'll notice that they, even if she unknowingly did this, she has been coached by Connie Barry Mack. Okay, literally coached behind the scenes by a guy who is a known advocate of communist Russia and RT. He tried to convince me that RT they were part of the good plan to bring information to the public, and we needed to join the resistance. But
you also can identify the same phrases that are being repeated.
Exactly. And the phrases that are being repeated, for instance, and this is where I knew something was up, because I was so disappointed that somebody so close to me had been compromised like that. But I knew what was up when she said back in October or November last year, she didn't want me to be so obsessed with the 9/11 evidence and Dr. Judy. And since then, our relationship hadn't been the same, although we were still close working together. And she said recently, unfortunately, that she actually used you. She said that you were controlling us from behind the scenes. And I said, I know what's going on here. Because that was actually probably 80-90% of it was absolutely false of what was being presented. But when she brought that up, and then I realized that Danny Romero spent 3 hours in her head. Even Danny Romero may be an unwilling participant as well of the system through Gordon Duff and all these.
I think almost everyone is. Yeah. And they get kind of brainwashed and psyoped. I've seen supporters of mine get affected.
Yeah.
And the wrong stuff getting, with however it's done.
Right. Yeah.
But it's so important to get back to looking at what do you know that you know that you know.
That's right. And one of the reasons why we're doing this session right here is we will not be deterred. There is 100% certainty that somebody has been compromised within our camp. There's no doubt about it. It's already been exhibited. I'm not going to launch a personal attack back at them because I was very close to that person.
Because that's the game.
Because that's the game. That's going to take us away from the message. That's right. That's a sandwich being laid on the hood. My apologies, especially to the people that I love the most, like No Messiah, Ashley, and especially Susanna Cole, that she has literally had her in tears. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Why does this impact you? And why am I bringing this up right now? I didn't want to bring it up. I'm being forced to at this point. But guess what?
It's what they use to deter things. I feel like I owe you an apology, but I shouldn't apologize for bringing out the truth and for your bringing out the truth. This is just what is used to deter people.
That's right. And that's why it's important that I mention this, especially having you online, because you know what's happening here. How many times has this happened to you? Something like this?
Just go Google, do a web search on my name, and you get plenty of trash.
We've had people
you have to wonder, why do people spend their time that way instead of solving the problems? I mean, the world's about to come to an end, or, the country's really in deep doo-doo.
That's right.
Why spend time on throwing boogers and spitwads at somebody and having food fights? We have a problem to solve.
Was Ace Baker thrown at you?
Was he what?
Was he thrown at you as a deterrent?
Oh, yeah.
As a distraction?
Oh yeah, he never smelled right from the beginning.
He's just some Goomba like Stu Webb, a former just
to cozy up to you. That's
meat and potatoes guy. Yeah, meat and potatoes. He appears to be a patriot, very very dedicated to the cause, and he's uneducated, just dumb as a box of paper clips, and he can be used to fake a death. And right before he fakes his death, he plants in the minds of all the listeners that Dr. Judy Wood lied to him. And that left a lasting impression. I use Ace Baker as an example because have there also been other people that have been closely associated with you? And I know the answer to this question. You can bring this up. There have been people.
Oh, lots and lots of different ones. We go on, list after list.
Yeah.
And there's also a pattern that starts emerging that people tend to show up at the most interesting times. Mm-hmm. Like right after one kind of gets outed,
right,
another one just appears.
Right. That's right. And they use, and when I say that, when I point out Suzanne Posel, she has no clue what just happened to her. They actually use, and this is how I describe this in the whole episode with the intro, is they real time figure out who the players are and how they can inflict the most damage based on who is actually running real time in the story. And they inject themselves to intercept the message that is coming to the listeners right now. And that is that we're talking about free energy technology existing, and we can shut down the nuclear power industry, the oil industry, the electrical industry. They will do everything at all costs, including compromising Suzanne Posel and throwing her under the bus to make her do something that is probably the most unethical, most disgusting thing I've ever seen any human being.
And her career is trashed from it.
Her career is done. Her career is over, and I'm just going to leave it at that and move on. Yeah,
you kind of feel badly for people who swallow something, but this collateral damage like
That's
that.
Right. That's
but
right.
It's undeniable that such technology exists.
I'm going to say something.
If you just look at it.
I'm going to say something to my listeners real quick, and then we'll move on. I was at one point in time, because I was abandoned with the guerrilla media thing. It was actually a collaborative effort. Suzanne Posel was drug into it in a conversation with me and Vinny. She was the one that was used to come at me to say that I had stolen it. I was going to change the name to the Blue Lemons Group. Really, I wanted to abandon Guerrilla Media Network. But because it was never stolen, it was a collaborative effort, I'm making a decision, and I'm going to announce it right now, that nobody will ever take this away from me now, because I've seen our community and what Guerrilla Media Network has become as part of this community that's rising up against what just happened to us. It will never, ever, ever be stripped from us. It is now permanently embedded in our souls and will never be stripped from us. So if anyone out there wants to think that, I stole something, I'm going to say right now I'm seizing it permanently because it was never stolen. I'm seizing it and putting it firmly in concrete. Now, Dr. Judy, let's move on.
Well, I'd like to add one more thing, something that I don't think you've ever heard me say, and that I've really admired about your show and your chat room and the wonderful people in the chat room. It's just beautiful that you've created an environment where people act like a community, and that is what we really need to have.
Of free-thinking individuals.
Yes, and people can have differences, and that's fine. They can do their whatever. And as long as everyone is, going in the same direction, doesn't matter how they're getting there. You know what I'm hearing on other channels, okay? Including that person that I just mentioned. I'm not even going to give her any more free publicity. She's actually repeating the stuff that I'm telling my audience, and she's sidejacking what I'm doing over here. They're already beginning to sidejack our community. I'm going to add one thing too. Mm-hmm. The buildings turned into dust. Majority of the buildings turned into dust in midair. Right. That's what I've established. I was ridiculed for saying that for the longest while, but when it can no longer be covered up, suddenly it becomes on the talking points list for a hallmark of controlled demolition with bombs.
Yeah, that's right. Mini nukes and all that other stuff.
Mid-air pulverization of steel and concrete and everything in the building.
What's absolutely remarkable is that the only people who are qualified to talk about the evidence are Dr. Judy Wood right now, as far as this equation in this conversation. Dr. Judy Wood wrote the book, Where Did the Towers Go? Pete Santilli read the book, and Suzanne Posel has never even read the book. And she doesn't even know why I'm so passionate, but she was bound and determined to make sure that I wasn't going to bring it forward. And that's very, very sad. But guess what, Dr. Judy? I want to mention one other thing.
If you're going to talk about what happened, you have to do a comprehensive forensic investigation.
Stick to the facts, and we're going to stick to the task. Let's move on.
And there's only one person I know who's done that in the public domain. I mean, not to give myself a pat on the back or anything, but
no, you have.
It's NIST didn't do that. That's the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They did not complete a comprehensive forensic investigation of what happened. Few people realize that.
Yep.
There's only one report in the public domain.
That's right. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you believe that I'm obsessed about this, absolutely, you should be too. You should be just as obsessed, just on your own. Take a look at the evidence, read the book, look at it. Don't let anyone else, including myself, tell you what you're seeing. You need to see it yourself, just like I did. No one, not even Dr. Judy. Dr. Judy, have you ever controlled me? Have you ever been able to control me?
Just like nobody can control me.
Would you say that in some instances, because of my lack of knowledge, and we're going to get to the next topic, and that is the sidejacking, all right? Would you say that in some cases, because I wasn't fully aware of my surroundings, that sometimes I was out of control and potentially damaging?
Yes.
I would say yes.
I started wondering, wanted to step back.
Oh, yeah.
I don't control people. I just assess the situation. Maybe it's time for me to, go elsewhere or something.
And, I'm not here to badmouth what Kesh is doing, because I said the other day, I was very, very clear to say that I hope that what Kesha was talking about was very true. But, you educated me on something, and it was very clear to me how potentially damaging I was by propping somebody or an organization or any individual up like that without having facts, without having evidence. You told me something very clear. You said you're getting away from the evidence. What proof did they have? You're actually advocating something that could be set up as part of a sidejacking, just get everyone's hopes up. And here you are as the person that's out there so obsessed bringing free energy technology forward, and you don't have one bit of proof from this place that you're advocating. There is no evidence that what they have exists. You need to stick to the evidence. Has it ever happened before, and here's where I want you to speak to our audience, has cold fusion ever been sidejacked?
Oh, yeah. The very name of it, cold fusion, was put on it to sidejack it.
Can you please explain to our audience why it was a critical mistake for me to take an organization that could have been planted out there, Kesha for that matter, could be used as a plant to get everyone's hopes up, only to set them intentionally set down for failure and for everyone to look at it and say, cold fusion. Pete Santilli said cold fusion exists. Kesha was the do-all, end-all, and it doesn't exist. Look, they can't even do anything. It was all a bunch of hoaxes.
It's like Charlie the Crow. How do you get him to drop the keys? Set the keys down by you. You give him a sandwich he's got to go steal. Then you grab the keys and they're gone.
That's right.
So here's the evidence that we have for what happened on 9/11. We don't need to go to Keshi's lab to, how many people can fit in there, and if they did witness, whether or not, anyone's going to believe him, or John Hutchison's lab,
right,
or whoever. There's a limit to how many people can realize that. But what happened on 9/11, the whole world saw. They were just told to see that they didn't see what they saw. But once they realized what they saw, it's undeniable. There's no going back.
Right.
That free energy technology exists. And once that's understood, that's sort of like the foundation on which everything else can develop freely out in broad daylight.
And
it's then proven that it exists, and that can't be taken away.
Can I just think out loud and tell you how my line of thought has come to understand what you were meaning by, like, you could potentially damage it? Can I just describe to our listeners what happened to me? Is that you said that there is evidence, factual, indisputable proof that on 9/11, free energy technology was used. Buildings were turned to dust. It's there right in front of you, and it cannot be denied. There is no other organization or entity or any other operation that has demonstrated the same thing. So you have to look for the proof. Where's the evidence? You told me. What evidence do you have?
I mean, of Keshe's thing.
I mean, we're going to say Keshe. I don't even want to badmouth him.
Yeah, right. I don't mean to either. There's no proof that it's wrong. There's no proof that it's right. It's hope.
You taught me to hold them accountable, to say, you know what, of course we hope. And I kept telling you that. All I told the listeners was I hope what they say is true. And she said, not just hope. You said, not just hope. Where's the proof? Hold them accountable. Where's the beef? Where's the beef? You said, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Judy Wood told me on 9/11, free energy technology was used. It's indisputable. There's proof. We had 2 buildings turned to dust. Any other place that's out running around saying that they have free energy technology and getting everybody whipped up and excited could potentially, unless they show proof, could be set up so that they disappoint
people
us.
that it is impossible.
Right. That's right.
Like people probably in your audience recognize that the fiasco with, quote, cold fusion. It's really low energy nuclear reactions that were first brought to light by Pons and Fleischmann, Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann.
Thank you.
From Utah. And Stephen Jones, who worked with the Department of Energy, got wind of what Pons and Fleischmann were up to because of their grant applications, and somebody tipped him off, and he decided to hold a press conference the day before they were going to release something. And there's this pressure. They were pushed to put it out there before they're ready. And if Stephen Jones went first, it would remove a possibility of their getting a patent on it. And so the University of Utah pushed them to have this press conference ahead of Stephen Jones. You know, it's this push. Well, Stephen Jones had been fiddling around with muon catalyzed fusion for years and years. It'll never amount to anything. But what Pons and Fleischmann were doing was an electrolytic process. They're chemists. Mm-hmm. And they had discovered something, that produces some kind of nuclear reaction. And Stephen Jones coined the term cold fusion. Ha ha ha, isn't that silly? Just like space beams. Cold fusion. And then if it's not fusion, then they get chucked overboard. And how they got chucked overboard was, well, if it's fusion, we should have all of these radioactive isotopes that would have killed them. So therefore, that proves that they're bogus. And, they have tritium, they report, but, well, they must have spiked their samples with tritium. Mm-hmm. Guess what? On 9/11, tritium was found without the radioactive isotopes. Interesting parallel.
That's right. Now, if you don't mind, and no offense to what you just said, okay? But, I always call our listeners meat and potatoes people like me,
Right. I was jumping forward and backward in time.
No, you were.
Tie that in.
Let me describe what I have now come to understand is that you asked me the other day, you said, do you understand what happened to Pons and Fleischmann? And
want me to go ahead with Malov. So when they have this claim, Pons and Fleischmann had demonstrated it, but everyone's skeptical. They want to see someone else replicate it.
Right.
So various universities were supposed to be replicating it,
right,
and some actually had, but they falsified the data to make it look like they hadn't.
That's right.
MIT was one of them, right, that they fudged the data. Eugene Malov got wind of that, and he was a full professor at MIT and resigned out of protest.
So if you don't mind me thinking out loud right in front of the audience, okay, this is the way I understood it. When you asked me the question the other day, when I was out there advocating somebody that didn't even have any proof that what they were claiming existed, they didn't show any evidence, no proof. You wanted me to focus on the fact that I need to hold them accountable. Make sure you see the evidence, because they could be used to compromise it, to get everybody all hyped up. There was a method by which they said, let's take this exciting cold fusion thing and in the public create a scenario where everybody will look at it and say, it's bogus, and get everyone conditioned to get real excited, prop them up, and then only to set them up intentionally for disappointment. Isn't that true?
Another 20 or 30 years to recover from that.
If they can buy
They destroyed the careers of Pons and Fleischmann. They did nothing wrong.
That's right. If they could use methods by which they can quash me and all of my excitement by throwing somebody like Keshe out in front of me advocating it,
yep,
what would my credibility be at that point if Keshe says, well, yeah, we said that we had free energy technology.
Yeah, you're promoting Keshe, and you're promoting what happened in 9/11.
That's right.
And if that's wrong, it shows his judgment's wrong, and so the other is assumed to be wrong.
That's right.
There's another incident I had mentioned too about Dan Rather. Just before the 2004 presidential selection.
Great scenario. Yes, please describe it.
That there's this document that showed that Bush was doing some draft dodging, and someone had done a remake of the real document, exact same wording, retyped it, but on a modern word processor. And Dan Rather showed that, and then they came up and proved that it was bogus, and the audience assumed the story was bogus. That was one way of getting Bush looking like he wasn't a draft dodger.
That's right. That's right.
And so, but it was a true story. But Dan Rather lost his job over that. He was a well-respected reporter.
And he actually reported the truth on a bogus document.
Right.
Yeah. And just because it was presented as a bogus document, he was held accountable to that.
Right.
Yeah.
So you got to be, real careful about how the game is played and how it's managed. And if somebody hasn't shown any evidence that you yourself believe and know to be true, then you're sticking your neck way out there.
Let me recap a couple quick things, okay, for our listening audience, because we're going to have about 5 minutes here left. All right. And ladies and gentlemen, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into overtime, and I have to limit it to 30 minutes maximum. 30 minutes. Because I have a busy schedule this afternoon. I want you to call 218-862-9829 if you want to speak to Dr. Judy. That will be in the overtime hours. You'll get a chance to speak to her directly, and I'll take the callers that are on the line right now. You'll have a chance to speak to her after hours. But Dr. Judy, here's what I believe we need to do going forward, okay, is to educate the public on not just the evidence and how to look at the evidence, how to make a decision for themselves, how to do, only believe what they've researched themselves. Don't trust anybody, right? Look at it with your own eyes. Teach them how to look at the evidence. And most importantly, and you've taught me this in a very nonchalant way, teach me how to resist the psyop and understand what's happening around me. And you've actually mastered that. And not just the psyoping, okay, and the techniques that are used as the story, unravels and evolves, right? They do that real time, but also the potential for sidejacking, that when we're over the target and we mention cold fusion, that they say, okay, these people are now awakening to cold fusion. Let's get them all amped up, throw out Kesh, and get them all disappointed in cold fusion and throw us off by 10 years. So sidejacking needs to be educated. But most importantly, going forward, we need to teach people how to convey this information to others, don't we?
True. And something else I see even more important, there's that KGB guy who gave this lecture in the early 80s talking about how to subvert a nation. And he says, that the subversion is complete when people don't know how to tell truth from falsehood, basically up from down. They're so scrambled, they don't know who to believe or what to believe.
Right.
But if you believe yourself,
right,
you don't have to know everything, but know what you know that you know, and know that everything else you don't know. And don't mix the two. Character
assassination is a very important part of the program. Creating argument is a very important part of the program, right?
And neither one of those things address the evidence.
They take us away from, it's the sandwich out on the hood of the car so that we'll drop the keys.
Yep.
Right? And I know that everyone understands that message. So in light of what's happened here in the past 24 hours, and a lot of this stuff, what I've attempted to do, ladies and gentlemen, and even Dr. Judy Wood, as literally as a professor to a student, taught me how to stay very focused. And we've even had very impassioned, we'll say, conversations about this, where I cannot be controlled. You've never been able to control me. But at the same time, I've operated out of control, almost irresponsibly, and I've had to learn my way through this. We will go forward here, ladies and gentlemen, and I will tell you without any hesitation that Dr. Judy Wood is a very important part of what we're doing here on the Guerrilla Media Network. She will have an active role. She will help us educate us on how this PSYOP and sidejacking, by the way, thank you, Stephen Schellen, for that term and allowing me to use it. Sidejacking has taken place, how to focus on the evidence and how to properly use the terminology so we're not regurgitating terms that benefit them. We don't want to be part of that PSYOP, even unknowingly and unwillingly, right? Because they can use certain terms and get us out there just regurgitating it like a bunch of parrots. and we don't even know that we're benefiting their message. Don't you agree with that,
Right,
Dr. Judy?
right. Just like all steel was shipped to China, steel-toed boots melting. These talking points that just get memorized, and pretty soon the person's not thinking anymore. They're just reading off talking points, just like one of the teleprompters would be feeding them.
Right, right. I'm not going to be fed into. As a matter of fact, I've already told Dr. Judy Wood that I'm done. For instance, there was an Amazon thread. I learned a lot of stuff that was happening there. I understood the honey potting. I'm done with the likes of those. I mean, there's still high-level psyops, but low level in the scheme of communicating to the 7 billion people on the earth. I'm done dealing with Duff and Fetzer, and now Suzanne Posel. She has no idea. She's a little biatch in the scheme of things. But I'm not gonna levy personal attacks back at them. If you guys ever want to know about the personal side of how damaging this thing was, I'm not going to talk about it. Professionally, I will address it just like I did in this episode. But we're going to move on, and we're not going to be deterred, are we, Dr. Judy?
Right. Remembering again what I have at the beginning of my book, just before chapter 1, it said, if you listen to the evidence carefully enough, it'll speak to you and tell you exactly what happened.
Yeah.
If you don't know what happened, keep listening to the evidence till you do.
Right.
The evidence always tells the truth.
Right.
This is the key part. The key is not to allow yourself to be distracted away from seeing what the evidence is telling you.
That's exactly right. We have here about...
No sandwiches.
No sandwiches. That's exactly right. 45 seconds. I want to conclude this segment, all right, by stating the following. Dr. Judy Wood does not control Pete Santilli. She's admitted that. She never will control Pete Santilli. But guess what? If she sends me a message to correct a misstatement via Skype, it's the same method that everyone uses in the chat room to tell me, hey, what about this? Hey, what about that? Maybe suggestive remarks. She can't come into the chat room, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, because of the stupid trolls. She's not going to do that. She's not going to be attacked. She's not going to log in as Dr. Judy Wood and get swarm tackled by a bunch of Fetzer cronies. That's not going to happen. So will she send me a message from time to time? Absolutely. Will you benefit because I'll relay that information to you? Absolutely. Okay. Dr. Judy Wood, in my opinion, is a very integral part of what we're doing here on the Guerrilla Media Network. And it will never be stripped from us, ever, period. If you want to call us and you want to speak to Dr. Judy Wood, I have a couple callers on the line, Dr. Judy. Is that okay?
Sure. I'd love to talk to them.
Okay. 218-862-9829. 218-862-9829. And ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this segment, and I'm going to just basically take us out very quickly, and we're going to get back to it because of my schedule, okay? Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the Pete Santilli Show. I'm joined by Dr. Judy Wood. I actually accomplished everything that I wanted to accomplish in this episode today. And that is, first and foremost, for your benefit. I wasn't going to whine and complain and talk about all the other personal stuff, although there's some personal stuff that's involved in it. I wanted to make sure that I didn't bring it here on the show unless you were going to benefit from it. And you are. I believe that. I think I feel very confident that took place in this episode. Thank you. And I hope you enjoyed that. Stay close to us.